What's up everybody, welcome back. So in this video I wanted to talk about setting up the third person character mesh. I talked about it a little bit in a previous video, why I wouldn't use a IK driven blueprint for a third person character mesh in first person shooters personally. So I'm going to show you how I would set it up with just aim offsets and montages basically. I'm going to add a fabric IK node to make a correction to the aim offset, and that's basically it. So it's not going to be really special, but I wanted to show you anyway. So let's get started right away. So like in the previous video, to start with, we need to make sure the HUD only gets created once in multiplayer. So we're going to place this at the end of the execution from begin play. So drag it over to the end, but first add a branch over here. And we're going to make sure that this is a locally controlled pawn. So is locally controlled. And we're going to plug that into the branch. So now the HUD will only be created for local players. So that's what we want. And obviously we need a third person character mesh and some animations. So I downloaded the animation starter pack from the marketplace. That's a free pack with 62 animations. So if you want to join along, you can download it and join along. So if we play this in multiplayer now, we should have one HUD, but we can't see each other. So there we go. If I fire, there's only one HUD, so that's working. Now let's add a third person mesh to this. So I'm going to go to the viewport and select my capsule component and add a skeletal mesh. So this is my third person mesh. And that's going to be the mannequin, so the SK mannequin. Let's make sure he's facing the right way. And drop him down to the floor. There we go. So if we scroll down over here, we need to make sure that the owner no see is selected, so myself can see the mesh. And I'm going to set cast shadow and also select the hidden shadow over here. So I can see the shadow, but I can't see the mesh. Now I'm going to move it back a little bit. Something like this should work. So we should at least see each other right now. There we go. There's no animations yet, so let's start working on the animation blueprint. So I'm going to create a new folder in here, third person mesh, and create the animation blueprint. Select the mannequin skeleton from the animation starter pack and click OK. So this is the third person mesh, NMBP. So let's start in the animation graph, and we're going to use the blend space that's already in here, the blend space jog. So we're going to drag this in. No, actually let's create a state machine first. So right click and create a new state machine. And double click it to open it. And we're going to drag off the entry and add a state, and that's going to be the idle state. And then we're also going to add a moving state and drag an arrow back to the idle state, just like this. Now for the transition from idle to moving, we're going to make sure that the speed is higher than 0. So we need a speed variable. Let's create one and call that speed. And that's going to be a float. Let's drag this in here and do is greater than float and plug it into the result. So if speed is greater than 0, we are moving. And for the transition back to idle, we're simply going to say if speed is smaller than or equal to 0 and plug that into the result as well. So if you double click the idle state, we can plug in the idle animation over here. So I'm going to make this the hipfire idle rifle hip, and drag it in over here, plug it into the output. And for the moving, we're going to drag in the blend space. So the blend space jog, plug that in here. So we can connect up the speed in here as well. And we need to add a variable for the direction. So let's create that. And this should work so far. So get back to the animation graph and make sure you plug this into the output pose. And now we need to make sure the variables actually do something. So in the event graph, I'm going to create a begin play event. And I'm going to cast to my character in here. So try cat pawn owner, and I'm going to cast to the first person character. And simply store this as a variable. So we don't have to cast every time. So that's the character. And we're going to use this in the event blueprint update animation. So drag it in again over here, and let's add an isValid check. Just to make sure. There we go. So for the speed, we can drag off the character and get the velocity. And for the velocity, we can get the vector length, and the vector length is the speed of the character, so we can simply plug that into the speed over here. And for the direction, I'm going to use a little bit different setup than usual. So it works in multiplayer as well, so I'm going to drag off the character again and get the actor rotation. From this, I'm going to get the delta rotator, and the B pin is going to be the velocity. So I'm going to drag that in, and it's going to convert it into a rotator. And then we can simply split this struct pin over here, and then the yaw is going to be our direction, but we need to multiply it with -1. So I'm going to multiply float with float. Excuse me, and that's going to be -1. And we're going to plug that into the direction. And now this should work. So if I compile and save, let's check this out. Where's my other viewport? Oh, that's really big. Oh, come on. There we go. So I need to add the animation blueprint to the character. So let's go back to the first person character, and we need to specify the blueprint in here. So if you have your third person mesh selected, just make sure over here in the anim class, we select the third person mesh animation blueprint that we created, compile and save. And now if we play, we have third person characters and we can see the movement. So on the right side, you can see the client can see the host moving. And if I will select one of the clients, you can see it's working the other way around as well. So the client can see other clients moving, and he can also see the host moving. So that's working. Let's continue in the animation blueprint over here. And now we are going to, let's see, what will we do? First, let's add the weapon to the third person character mesh. Maybe that's a good thing to start with. So I'm going to open my third person mesh. Let's see, it's in the animation starter pack, the mesh, mannequin mesh. And I'm going to go to the skeleton tab over here. I'm going to add a socket to the right hand, and that's going to be the weapon socket. So now let's play an animation over here. So the preview controller used a specific animation, and I'm going to play the idle animation for the rifle. I'm going to pause it so it's not moving. And I'm going to add the weapon to the weapon socket we created. So I'm going to add a preview asset, and that's going to be the assault rifle. And now make sure it lines up. So let's see. Let me hide these bones. This is really annoying. There we go. Well, something like that I think should do. I'll take it. So that's the weapon socket. Obviously you could also add a bone in Blender if you would like to, then you could animate it and use that for multiple weapons. If you use a socket, you would have to create a socket for each weapon, so just a little side note. So select the third person mesh over here, and I'm going to add a new skeletal mesh to it again, and this is going to be the third person weapon. Now let's assign the assault rifle A, and let's set the parent socket to our weapon socket over here, so it snaps into position. And now also make sure that we select the hidden shadow again, and down here the owner no C. So then we should be good to go over here. So all 4 players have a weapon and we can see him, so that's working. So we can go back to the animation blueprint and continue working in there. So let's see, we need to add aim offsets. So we need to create them first, by the way. So let's go to the animation folder from the starter pack. And this has the aim space animations, and we need to make sure that we make this into single frame animations in the correct direction. So I'm going to duplicate this. First let's start with the hip aim space. I'm going to duplicate it and call this aim offset hip rifle center. Let's open it up. So this is center. That means he's facing forward and he's also aiming straight forward, not up or down. So I'm simply going to leave this at frame 0, then right click and remove frame 1 to 87. So it's a single frame right now. And I'm going to set it to be a mesh space additive selected animation frame, and it needs the rifle idle animation as a base pose. So idle rifle hip. And let's save it. And now we need to do the same thing twice for center down and center up. So again, I'm going to duplicate this and call it aim offset hip rifle center down. And let's look for the facing down position. So that's over here, frame 20. So remove frame 0 to 20 and then remove 1 to 68. Again, make this mesh space additive, selected animation frame, and select the idle rifle, the hip animation, and do this one last time for the center up. So aim offset hip rifle center up, and that's going to be frame 10. So remove the other frames again and set it to be mesh space additive selected animation idle rifle hip. So that should work. And now we also need an ADS aim offset, so we're going to do the same thing for the iron sights and make 3 animations from that as well. So that's going to be aim offset ADS rifle center. And again, we need to remove the other animations. So right click, remove the other frames and set it to mesh space additive selected animation frame. But this time we need to use the iron sights idle animation. So look for idle rifle iron sights and save it. And do the same thing 2 more times. So idle aim offset ADS rifle center down. That's going to be frame 20, so remove the other frames. Mesh space additive, selected animation frame, idle rifle iron sights. And let's do the center up as well. Aim offset ADS rifle center up. So that's frame 10. Mesh space additive, selected animation frame, idle rifle iron sights. And we should be good to go over here. So let's create a new folder to make things a little bit easier. Aim offsets And I'm going to move these animations we created into this folder, move them. And now let's create the actual aim offset. So I'm going to go to animation and create a one-dimensional aim offset. So we only need to aim up and down because left and right the character is just turning. So make sure you select the right skeleton, and this is going to be aim offset, rifle, hip. And we need to assign the correct animations, but first let's set the axis settings over here. So it's going to be our aim pitch, and it's going to go from -90 to 90. And then we can simply plug in the animations. So the hip center goes in the 0 position, center down goes -90, and center up goes 90. So this is rifle hip, so that should work. Save this and we can close it and do the same thing for the ADS. So create an aim offset again. Aim offset, ADS, rifle. Set the axis setting, so pitch -90 to 90. And plug in the animations. ADS center, center down goes -90 and center up goes 90. And we are good to go over here. So now we can finally go back to the animation blueprint and make sure we start using these aim offsets. So let's see. Let's just drag them into the animation graph. The ADS rifle and the rifle hip. So I switched over the naming, but that doesn't matter. So we need the pitch variable, so drag it in over here, promote to variable, and let's call it aim pitch. And make sure we also plug it into the other aim offset. So this needs a base pose, and I'm simply going to use the idle animations. So the idle rifle hip for the hip aim offset, and the iron sights for the ADS one. After this we're going to add a blend by bool. So blend by bool. The true pose is going to be ADS and false is going to be hip. Now we need to drive this with a variable, so promote it to a variable, and this is going to be isAds. And after that we need to add a layered blend per bone node. So let's move this over a little bit and look for layered blend per bone. So the blend pose is going to be the blend by bool, so the aim offsets that we added, and the base pose is going to be the state machine that we created. And then we can plug this into the output pose. Now all we need to set up is the layered blend per bone. So if we select it on the right side, I'm going to add 3 branch filters over here. And the first one is going to be spine 02 with a blend depth of 4. And the other ones are going to be the thigh bones. So I'm going to go thigh left with a blend depth of -1, and thigh right also with a blend depth of -1. So if you're using another skeleton, you would need to make adjustments over there probably. So this simply refers to the spine bones. You can play around with it a little bit to see what works best. And the blend depth is basically how much more bones down the hierarchy it will blend the animation. And if we set the thigh bones to -1, that means it won't blend into the legs. So that's the setup for the layered blend per bone. And now we should be able to use this if we drive the aim pitch and the ADS variable. So we need to go to the event graph. And for the ADS we can simply use the aim button pressed from the character. So let's go to the character blueprint. And we have our isAim button pressed variable over here, but we need to make sure this is being replicated. So let's see. I'm going to double check real quickly. Yeah, I'm going to make sure this variable replicates, and I'm going to set that in the animation blueprint, and then everything should work again. So I'm going to create a custom event over here, and that's going to call set is aiming, and a second custom event, and that's going to be server set is aiming. So the server set is aiming doesn't need to be replicated or doesn't need to be a multicast, but the set is aiming needs to be set to run on server for the replicated functions. So a client is going to call this function. This function tells the server to call this function for the client, and then that's going to set the variable. So for things like montages or particle effects or sounds, you need a multicast event from the server so every player sees it. But if you want to set a variable, for example, you can simply use a normal event as long as the server calls it, because the server has authority, and if he sets the variable, then it will change for the other players as well, as long as you make sure that you set the variable itself to be replicated. So on the right side over here, set the replication to replicated. Now we need to disconnect this and add a check over here to see if we are the server. So I'm going to add the switch has authority node. So if we have authority, we most likely are the server, and I'm going to just drag this right into the setter over here. And if we are a client, we need to call the set is aiming event. So set is aiming, and that's going to be executed on the server as long as a client calls this, and that makes sure that the server sets the variable for us. So we're going to copy this set is aiming node over here. And let's make sure that we pass on the variable. So I'm going to add inputs over here is ADS, and also for the server function. So connect this up, and from this function we can call the server set is aiming, and make sure we also plug this in over here. So we need to refresh this node. It says new parameter, so refresh nodes, doesn't work, compile, throws an error, refresh it again. There we go. So over here, after the client has told the server he wants to change the ADS, we're going to also set it locally for the client, so that reduces a little bit of lag, especially with a bad connection. So make sure if you're a client, you also set variables locally most of the time. That will make things feel a bit smoother. And we need to do the same thing when we release the aim button. So I'm simply going to copy this stuff and paste it in over here. And connect them up. Make sure I set this to false, and now this should be replicated, so that should work. And let's compile and save. Go back to the animation blueprint event graph, and we can get the variable from the player now, so from the character. Drag it off here, get is aim button pressed, and simply store that into our isAds variable. And we should be good to go over here. And now we also need to get our aim pitch for the aim offsets. So let's go continue with that. Drag off the character again and get our base aim rotation. And we can split off this truck pin, and that already gives us the pitch that we need. But there's one minor thing we need to do. So this will rotate from 0 to 360, and we need to make sure it works with minus 90 to 90. So we're going to drag off the pitch, and we're going to add a branch over here, and that needs to be telling us if this is greater than 90. So drag off this pitch from the base aim rotation, and get a float greater than float, and we want to know if this is greater than 90. So add a branch over here. So if our aim pitch is greater than 90, we're gonna take 360 off, so float minus float, reduce it with 360 and store that in our aim pitch. And if it's false, we can simply store the aim pitch directly. And now this should work. So I'm going to compile and save it, and let's play this. Let's see, let me get a client, and I'm going to move around so you can see me aiming up and down. And if I right click, you can see me ADS, and you can also see me ADS on the other client screen and on the server screen. So aiming up and down. So then the other way around for the server should work as well. So I'm able to ADS and aim up and down, and I'm also got a hip space for aiming up and down. So there's one little thing we need to fix with our aim offset. So if we move our mouse up and down, you can see the left hand doesn't really follow the gun, especially if we ADS, it's nowhere near the weapon. So we need to fix this. And we can, so let's close this down and go to the animation graph over here. So we need to add a fabric node, and I'm going to add it over here. So let's disconnect this. And I'm going to look for the fabric node, add this over here and connect it up, so it'll add the transforms. So if we select this, we need to make sure that we have the affected target set to the hand left. So that's the hand we want to correct. The transform space is going to be bone space. We can leave the rotation source, that's fine. The tip bone, oh I'm sorry, the affected target needs to be hand right. And then the tip bone needs to be hand left. And the root bone needs to be upper arm left, so that's the entire left arm that we want to modify. And we can leave the other settings as it is. So if I compile this right now, you can see the left hand snaps to the right hand. So that's obviously not what we're looking for, but we can add an adjustment to this. So if we look at the affected transform, we can disable the expose pin over here, and then we can simply set the transform over here. So I'm going to make sure the left hand lines up with the gun again. So somewhere around here maybe. Let's move it forward. Yeah, something like this should do, I think. So let's set it to -31. So let's move it up a bit. Something like this, so maybe 2. That's a little bit twitchy. 1.5 maybe. Yeah, that looks a bit better, so 1.5. And left to right looks pretty good, to be honest, so let's try 14. Well, 14.5 maybe. So that should work. So now we have the left hand hooked up to the gun, and now if we look at the aim offsets, this should look a lot better. So let's try this again. Let's go and pick one of the clients. So if I ADS and aim up right now, you can see the left hand stays attached to where we placed it. And also in the hip aim offset, it works a lot better. So there we have the left hand fixed for the aim offset. And that also works the other way around, obviously. If it works for the client, it usually works for the server as well. So there we have it. And now all we need to do pretty much is play the montages. So if we go back to the first person character, like I mentioned before, for montages you need a multicast event. So for example, if I want to play this reload animation for other players, I'm going to create a new event and call it, let's create it, custom event, third person play reload animation, or montage, play reload montage. And then I'm going to add a second one and call it client play reload montage. And I'm going to create a third one, and that's the server one. So server play reload montage. So the server one is going to be a multicast this time. The client one again needs to be run on server, and this is going to be a normal event, so I can simply call it from here. So I'm going to do third person play reload animation montage, I'm sorry. And from here I'm going to do has authority, which has authority. So if I'm the host, I can simply call the multicast event directly. So the multicast event can only be called from the server, so that's why you need to make sure we are the server. So play reload montage. And if we are a client, we need to call this client function to tell the server we want to call it. So client play reload montage. From this event, we're going to call the server version, so server play reload montage. And obviously, we don't want these hooked up over here, so let's plug these over here in the multicast event. And over here, we're simply going to do this, so that really doesn't make any sense. So let's get rid of this and plug this in right over here, so that should work. And now we should have a reload animation, but we screwed up one thing, so let's close this. This doesn't work, so we need a third person reload, obviously. So this is the first person reload animation. That's not going to work. This is the animation for the weapon. We don't need that at all, so let's get rid of that one. And let's go to the animation folder over here and look for the reload animations. And we need to create montages for them. So reload rifle hip. Let's right click, create an animation montage. And let's open this up. So we need to make sure that this plays on a correct slot. So we need to create a slot, and I'm going to call this upper body. And then over here we can set it to use that slot, so slot name upper body. So it looks like it's broken, but if we drag this little bar a little bit over here, it pops into place again, so nothing really bad happened. And we don't really need to set anything else over here, so we can save it and close it. And do the same thing for the rifle iron sights reload. So I'm going to create an animation montage again, open it up and set it to use the upper body slot. And just save it. And now all we need to do over here is check if we have the aim button pressed. So I'm going to add a branch. So this variable is replicated, so there's no need to pass it on or something like that. We can simply check it and it should work. And I'm going to promote this montage to play to a variable. I'll call this reload montage. And make sure we set it to the correct montage. So if we are ADSing, it's going to be the iron sights one, and otherwise it's going to be the hip one. So let's see. Reload rifle hip and reload rifle iron sights. And now this should work. So let me grab one of the clients over here and press the reload button. And it's not even reloading for myself. Let me see. As authority. Run on server. Okay, that's cool. What is happening over here? Oh, I know. So let me see. So I deleted these other nodes, and that was a bit stupid. So I'm messing things up now because obviously the other ones were for the first person animation and we still need that. So I'm playing this on the first person arms mesh, and that's really not going to work. So we need to plug in the third person mesh over here. And we had this node already at the beginning. So that was for the first person arms mesh. And that was playing our first person reload. And I should have just left that in place. So first person reload, what's the one I made? This one, I think. And we also played the reload animation on the weapon mesh. So play animation. And that was the reload, first person rifle reload. Plug that in like this. So this was the first person part. I shouldn't have deleted it because we still have the first person mesh, obviously. I got a little bit confused. Then we're going to check if we are the server or not and make sure we call the proper event. Play the third person mesh reload montage, and we still need to make sure we add the slot in the animation blueprint as well. So if we open the animation blueprint over here, we need to add the upper body slot. So this layered blend per bone, make sure we play the upper body animation. So we're going to plug this into the blend pose and add a slot node. Plug this into the blend pose again and make sure we set it to the upper body slot we created. Save, and now I think we should be good to go if I didn't screw up anything else. So let me see, press reload, and that seems to be working. But there's one little problem. So we tied the left hand to the gun and it stays connected to the gun even during the reload animation. So we need to fix that. And we can do that by setting the alpha from the fabric node. So if we go to the animation blueprint, this fabric node over here has an alpha, and if we set it to 0 while we are playing the reload animation, we can make sure that the left hand can move again. So I'm gonna drag this off and promote to a variable, call it left hand IK alpha. And we need to create it on the character as well. So go to your character blueprint and create the left hand IK alpha. Make sure it's a float. And we want to make sure that we set it with the reload animation. So let's go to the reload multicast that we have over here. So we need to make sure this is replicated. So that's why we use the multicast event. So directly when playing the animation at the start, I'm going to set it to 0. But if we set it to 0 immediately, we would see the hand pop in and out of place. So we need to make sure this happens a little bit smoother. So I'm going to interpolate the float. So look for the interp2 node. The F interp2 because we are interpolating a float. So currently we are at our left hand IK alpha position. So we can plug that in. And we want to interpolate to 0, so that's fine. For the delta time, we can simply get it. So get delta world seconds. And plug that in. And I'm going to make sure it interpolates quite quick. So set it to something like 20 maybe. Then we need to add a branch over here to check if we are at 0 or not. So drag in the alpha again and look for the smaller than or equal to. Nope. Smaller than or equal to 0. Plug it into the condition. So if this is false, we need to loop back to the beginning. So we're going to add a delay to make sure we're not getting infinite loop crashes. And we can plug in the delta seconds over here again and then loop back to the beginning. So if this is true, we are done and we are going to stop the execution, so that's fine. And for when the animation is done, we need to make sure we set it back to 1 again. So we can copy and paste this and plug it into the uncompleted, maybe unblend out. We can play around with it, see what looks better. So we're going to interpolate from the left hand alpha to 1. and make sure that this is greater than or equal to 1. So let's delete this. If it's greater to or equal 1, connect it up to the condition. So otherwise loop back to the beginning. And if this is true, I'm going to set a variable. So I'm going to create a isReloading variable. And that needs to be a boolean. And if this is done, I'm going to set it back to false. So at the beginning over here, when I press my reload button, I want to make sure that I'm not already reloading and messing with my IK aim alpha. So this only happens once. So I'm going to add a branch over here, plug in my isReloading, and if it's false, I'm going to continue. But first I need to set it to true, so create a little bit of room, add a setter over here, set it to true, and then plug it in over here. Now we need to make sure this is replicated, so replication replicated. Now you would think, why not add an event to tell the host to do it for us? Well, this is an input event, and this only gets executed locally. So if I set it to true locally, I can only execute it once, and that's fine. The server doesn't need to know about this, to be honest. But if the server sets it back to false in the multicast event, it will go back to false for me as well, so I'm able to reload again. So that's why I really don't need to make sure the true setter gets replicated. As long as the false one gets replicated, that's fine in this case. So this should work, and we also need to make sure the left-hand IK alpha is replicated. And then we can use this in the third person animation blueprint event graph. So get it from our character, get left-hand IK alpha, and store it into the variable we have over here. And now the left hand should be able to move again if we reload. So let's see if that's working. Yes, it is. So as you can see, reload animation is playing. But if we use the aim offset, the hand is still connected to the weapon, so that's working. So I do see a little bit of popping into place. So maybe we should connect it to on blend out and see how that looks. Or on completed, sorry, I had it on blend out. So let's try again. Yeah, that looks much better. So as you can see, it's not popping into place anymore. We have an ADS version of the reload where it lowers the gun first, and we have the hip reload animation. So that's working, and you can see the clients can see the other client reloading as well as the server can see it, so that's fine. And it should work for the server as well. So if I select the server and reload, the client can see it, so that's fine. So now all we need to do pretty much is get the fire animation working. So we need to add a multicast event for that as well. So now let's make sure I'm not messing with the first person stuff. So leave all of this stuff in here and simply create a new function and call this third person fire. Well, let's call it fire weapon. And I'm going to call this over here, so we're not using that delay, get rid of it. So we have the fire function, and right after the play montage we have a pin that's executed immediately. So we are continuing from the uncompleted, and over here I'm going to call the third person fire weapon function event. And over here I'm going to make sure it's going to play the animation. So I'm going to add 2 new custom events, one for the client. Let's see, client play fire montage, and then a server one as well. So create a custom event, server play fire montage. So the server version is a multicast event because this is for montages. The client one needs to be run on server. And this can be a normal event. So over here, I'm going to check if I have authority. So has authority. If we are the server, we're going to call the server event directly. So server play fire montage. And if we are a client, I'm going to call the client version. Client play fire montage. So from the client one, I'm going to call the server one. And over here we are going to play the montages, but we need to create them again. So let's go to the animation folder and look for the fire animations. So fire rifle hip. Let's create an animation montage from this and open it up. So again, make sure we set it to the upper body slot. And I'm also gonna make sure that this is a mesh space additive animation, but I need to set it in the animation itself. But first let me set the blend option over here to a much smaller blend, because the animation is so short, otherwise we won't see anything playing. So make sure you reduce the blend times as well. And then open the actual animation, not the montage. And make sure you set the additive anim type to mesh space with the selected animation frame and the proper idle animation. So that's idle rifle hip for this fire animation. And do the same thing for the iron sights one. So let's open up this one first and set it to be mesh space additive, selected animation frame, idle rifle iron sights this time. Save it. And now create the montage. And make sure for the montage that we set it to the upper body slot. And that we set the preview base pose. So that's the idle iron sights. And reduce the blend times again, so 0.05. So something like this should work. And let me see, go back to the first person character and check if we are ADSing or not. So that should be a replicated variable that we can simply check over here. Yes. So we can tell by these little dots over here that it's replicated. So we're going to play a montage on a third person mesh. So play montage. Promote the montage itself to be a variable and call it the fire montage. Oop. And now plug in the correct montages for ADS or hip fire, so true and false. True is going to be the hip fire, so rifle hip montage, and false ADS. Plug them into the play montage node and we should be good to go over here. So let's see if this is working. Client first. Hey, why is my aim space not working? Oh, I know why. So the default value in the first person character for the left hand IK alpha, set it to 1. Otherwise we need to reload once before it works. And now this will work from the beginning. So play again. Okay, so the fabric node is working. We can still reload, so that's working. And I think I messed up something with the animation because it's playing a reload animation when I press fire. So as I set the reload animations, I suck. So let me see, fire rifle hip. Iron sights is the top one and hip is the lower one. And now this should look a lot better. So that's an actual fire animation, not a reload animation. So we have the ADS fire and hip fire animations playing and working. The reload is still working. Aim offset is working, so that seems to be all good. So let me grab the host. And that should work as well. So let me see, play the fire animation, hip fire, ADS fire. So you can see things are working and replicating, so that's nice. So I think we have most of it covered now. We have the lower and raise animation left. Well, that's basically just copying what we did for the reload. So make sure you use a multicast event to play the montages, and then you should be good to go. So the default rule is that the animation blueprint itself is replicated. You really don't need to do anything special in the animation blueprint. Just make sure that the variables and or events that drive the animation blueprint are replicated, and then everything should work. So we are good to go over here. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked the video or you think you might have learned something, please consider leaving a like. I'll be back for more.